Lived there for 16 years.
What town?
Somerville.
Yeah, of course I know Somerville, yes. And were you a journalist then?
Yes.
Okay.
Worked at the Bridgewater Courier News.
Yes, okay. That's from real good Jersey.
My husband's was of Portuguese descent, so we went into the Ironbound section.
Yes.
And partook of some of those restaurants and the festas.
Yes, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Did he speak any Portuguese at all?
I'm Kathy Obradovich from the Des Moines Register, and we're here today with Senator Cory Booker, Democratic candidate for president.
You could mess that up if you want. I'm perfectly comfortable.
I could rearrange the words there. He is a U.S. Senator from New Jersey and the former mayor of Newark. Welcome, Senator Booker.
Thank you very much for having me.
And around the table are Register reporters and editors. Let's just go around and have everybody say their name, please.
Enrica Basu, Rachel Staffenberger, politics editor. Brianne Bonensteel, chief politics reporter. Katie Aiken, politics reporter. Cecilia Hanley, digital director.
Robin Upsall, politics reporter.
Austin Cannon, I cover the Booker campaign.
Andy Dominic, editorial writer.
Rox Laird, editorial board member.
Carol Hunter, executive editor.
Okay, thank you. And Senator Booker, why do you think you're the best candidate that Democrats can nominate to run against President Trump in the fall?
So first of all, I just want to say how grateful it is to be here. This is a big moment for me because my family's from Des Moines. My grandmother was born and raised here, and she was raised in a time born before there was the right to vote. And frankly, she was raised by parents who, one worked in a bank as a janitor, the other was a domestic. And it's a story that motivates me even in what I'm doing right now, which is this idea that this country and this campaign, it's not about what we're against. It's not about Donald Trump. It's about us and who we are to each other. I think beating Donald Trump is important, but it's the floor, it's not the ceiling. And I'm running for president because I believe beating him is critical. It gets us out of a valley, but I'm running because I think our country's got to continue to aspire to get to the mountaintop. And I believe I'm the best person in this race to heal this country, to bring us together, to remind us of our common cause and our common bonds, and that we have to begin to affirm in our generation that mission of this country, which is to put more indivisible into this one nation under God so that we can achieve liberty and justice for all. We have a lot of work to do and new challenges in this generation that previous generations couldn't even imagine, like the urgency of climate change. And I believe I'm the best one, not to just beat Donald Trump, but to help to create a new sense of national mission to deal with our challenges and seize our opportunities.
Oh, the question is a little bit comparative. I mean, why do you think you're the best one?
Well, I've got a track record of doing just what I said. When I was mayor of the city of Newark, we were a city that, as you probably knew, was known for crime and corruption, 60 years of decline, our population declining, our tax base declining, a school system that was under state takeover. And so coming out of law school, I ran at the toughest problems in this country, not with this belief that I could solve them, but that if we could create uncommon coalitions, we could create uncommon results. And we made Newark a national cause, getting philanthropy and developers joining with people who had agency over their own city's destiny. And we created transformative change, doing things that other people thought were impossible. Our school system now is ranked the #1 school system in America for beat the odds schools. Our city, in the middle of a recession, went through its biggest period of economic expansion in 60 years. And then in the Senate, a place known for things not getting done, I made a reputation for myself working across the aisle to make big things happen. The only major bipartisan bill to pass underneath this president was one that I led from the Democratic side with Dick Durbin for criminal justice reform. So past is prologue. You want to know what kind of leader somebody's going to be in the future, look at what they've done in the past. For me, it's always been about challenging the moral imagination of others of what we can do together and pushing ourselves beyond the realm of what people think can be done to remind them that American history is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible. So as a chief executive, as a member of our federal legislature, I've shown the ability to get things done. It's a unique resume in this whole field. And as President of the United States, that's the way I'm going to lead.
What specifically would you do to restore the dignity to the office of President of the United States?
Well, the first thing, which is very contrary to what we're seeing right now, is you have to approach that office with humility. And what I learned from being an executive in Newark is leadership is not about look at me, follow me. Leadership is about inspiring other people that they need to lead as well. I tell people very bluntly in this campaign that if you elect me president of the United States, I'm going to warn you, I'm going to ask for more from you than any president has ever asked before. Because we are not going to be able to mobilize and meet the challenges of this nation unless all of us understand that, as Frederick Douglass says, if there's no struggle, there is no progress. And when you use that word dignity, dignity is not something talked about. It's something that is manifested. It's something that's shown. It's something that you demonstrate through your actions, through how you treat other people, how you talk about other people. I always say that what you say about others says more about you than it says about the person you're talking about. And so I believe my mission is to restore dignity and honor to that office, but I think you do that by bestowing honor and dignity around all of Americans.
So how do you reach out to the core base that still supports Donald Trump? I mean, tell me some things that you get about their sense of grievance or their sense of entitlement, whatever it is. But what do you see in his supporters that you could appeal to them to support?
Well, first of all, I think if we go at each other through political lenses, it becomes very hard. When you start that way and sit down with somebody and say you're a Trump supporter,
Right.
that puts people in their defensive partisan postures right away. Look, years ago I wanted to really work on agricultural issues because I know, as a guy that lives in an inner city, that what goes on in the Midwest directly affects what goes on in communities like mine. We live in an interwoven society. So I went out with this goal, and I took a guy from the Farmers Union, and I said, I want to meet with Republican farmers, red state farmers. And I still remember arriving at a farm, and the guy had a very stiff posture towards me, very formal. He took me down to look at his cows and his pigs, and I was trying to loosen him up, so I used every bad joke I could, like, your cows are utterly amazing, sir. And I milked my jokes for everything that I had. And we get back to his place, and he's got his neighbors, other Republicans around him, and we start talking, not as Republicans and Democrats, but hey, what's going on? What are your pain points? And they told me these awful stories about their share of the consumer dollars going down 50% in recent years, about how they're getting squeezed by the source material companies, Monsanto and others, that now are raising prices. They literally, one guy was afraid to talk to me about what it's like to go from 5 people buying your goods to 1, and he was afraid because he said people were getting cut off if they were complaining. And before you know it, we're talking about corporate consolidation and what's going on in America and how it's hollowing out our Midwest. Before you know it, by the end, this guy that seemed to barely want to talk to me in the beginning is having his family come out, his kids, to take selfies with me because we agreed. You know, Brene Brown, I love her work, and she says, you can't hate up close, so pull people in. Not as a party member, not as a Trump supporter, but as a fellow American. And so you want to know how you reach people, and this is why, again, I use this word. Patriotism is love of country, and you cannot love your country unless you love your fellow countrymen and women. And love doesn't mean we always agree with each other, always even like each other on every day. But we recognize the human dignity and that we all have the same aspirations in terms of loving our family, wanting security, wanting opportunity. And so I've had when I got to the Senate, I got the best advice from Bill Bradley to do the same thing. Before you get on the floor and do debates, take your colleagues out to dinner. Ask to sit with them in their office. Get to know them as human beings. I go to Bible study in Chairman Inhofe's office. I go to work out in the gym, and as you can see, not because I'm in great shape, but because you're running on the treadmill next to a Republican colleague. I still remember one of my funniest dinners of my life was with Ted Cruz. And first of all, finding a restaurant for a vegan and a guy from Texas was very hard. But people literally were tripping walking past us. I invented a word, this is my trademark, called stealthy, because people were pulling out their phones taking secret pictures of us, because it was such a rarity in Washington, it seemed, for us to sit down. But he and I have passed legislation together This country, our biggest challenge right now, sincerely I mean this, is that we agree on big things, but we can't manifest them. Infrastructure, gun safety, we can't get them done because we're tearing each other apart along tribal lines when we don't realize that we're one team, this country, we're one team in an increasingly competitive world in which we're falling behind. You want to say something in Iowa that just, and again, this is the privilege you sometimes have in your living communities like mine, is I was stunned going around this state having kids raise their hands and ask me about them getting internet in their homes. And we're competing globally against South Korea or Germany, who have universal broadband penetration. And here in our rural areas, maybe 55% of the kids have access to the internet. We can't compete globally. This is not a partisan issue, it's a competitive one. And we've got to recognize it's us, we're the same team. We've got to start working together to achieve great things again.
How would you say America will be different in 2024, the end of your first term, if you're elected?
Look, every big thing we've done, when the Russians put up Sputnik, we mobilized this country to put a person on the moon and brought together uncommon coalitions to produce uncommon results, hidden figures, black women with white astronauts. We beat the Nazis, we beat Jim Crow. These are the things we did by creating new American majorities. Not partisan majorities, but new American majorities, a new consciousness, so to speak, in this country. The way that I was able to make change in Newark was to get people to think differently about themselves and this city. And so I know that my first hours in office, my hand will be tired. My left hand will be tired writing executive orders and doing all the things. But for the bigger things that we need to do, to overcome what people say, I get this question all the time, well, what about the filibuster? Well, the longest filibuster in American history was Strom Thurmond and his racist rants to prevent the civil rights. So how did we overcome that? Did we overcome it in a partisan way? No, we overcame it because artists of activism called to the moral imagination of this country, found ways to revive ideals of civic grace and common cause, and we overcame that and got big things done. Civil rights legislation. I worry right now about an impotency of empathy in our country, because when 4 girls died in a bombing in Birmingham, this whole country rose up and we changed laws. At the Shirtwaist Factory fire, when women threw themselves out windows and died on the pavement below, I could go through those moments where we would view deaths, Emmett Till, and they would churn the soul of this country, and we would do things. Now, from a synagogue in Pittsburgh to a church in Charleston, people die and we do nothing. 90% of us agree, and when people are killed in classrooms, children under desks from Newtown to Parkland, we do nothing. And is that because we don't believe in universal background checks? Over 90% of Americans do. Do we not believe in gun licensing? Is that radical? No. Over 80% of Americans agree on it. And we now have surrendered because freedom, it's our ideal, but we're not free when our culture is being infected with fear, and the best thing the strongest nation in the world can do right now is send its children to school and teach them how to hide. There are more shelter-in-place drills now being done in America than fire drills. And so this has got to be more than just beating Donald Trump. This is not an election that's a referendum on one guy in one office. It's a referendum on who we are and who we're going to be to each other. And I know to get big things done, to turn around a school system in Newark, you have to begin to get people to understand that we need each other. We've got to come together and create the environment in which we can again pass big legislation.
One way to look at that question is a priority question. So if you get nothing else done, what will it be? Is it fixing our system? Is it fixing our health care?
So I don't have just when I was mayor, I did not have the luxury of telling people one issue. What was more important in my city? The people getting killed, the murder rate which was spiking when I took over, or was it the kids that are going to school and not having an education that serves their genius? You don't have that luxury. And I don't as President of the United States, because this is what I laugh at when people tell me the number one thing that Democrats want is somebody who can beat Donald Trump. And I'd say, we need to have bigger aspirations than that, because in my neighborhood is the only person in this race, the only person in the United States Senate that lives in a community below the poverty line where I've lived for 2 decades plus. You want to talk to people on my block about choose one thing that you can do when I have people still shot in my neighborhood, when I have people that work full-time jobs and have the dignity-stripping endeavor of having to use food stamps to feed their family, when they can't trust the water coming out of their sink, when they're being disproportionately incarcerated, kids being arrested for doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents admitted to doing. And so I'm sorry, I have bold ambitions for my country that are not defined by one thing, except for the fact that the spirit of this nation needs to be rekindled. Because the last time I went into the SCIF, which is the confidential bunker below the Senate where you give up all your watches and electronics and read classified documents, the document I wanted to read was the intelligence reports on what the Russians are doing to interfere with our election. And here I'm sitting alone in this room, and I'm shaking the paper because one of their strategies that they are using is to use our social media platforms to try to make us hate each other more, to whip up hate. Because as Khrushchev wanted, he said, we're not going to destroy this country tank for tank or warship for warship. America, they said, will be destroyed from within.
Do you fear that this impeachment inquiry will actually embolden Trump's base to be more defensive and to feel, some of the Republican commercials that are airing on TV already are basically saying the Democrats lost the last election and they're just trying to get back at him?
Yeah, and he'll make that case, and people will believe him. Some people will believe him. But this is where you and the magic's never left me. When I walk onto the Senate floor, I feel the gravity of being there. When I swore my oath, Joe Biden swore me in as a United States Senator. And I swore an oath to uphold, to defend and protect the Constitution. And so there are times where you can't think through a partisan political lens. This is really about what are the standards in our nation, and has he violated those standards? And if you believe he has, then you have a historic obligation. If you believe he is trashing the Constitution, the checks and balances, the commitment to put the country's interests first, then you have to do what's right and let history judge, let politics be damned. And so this is one of those moments where our founding fathers literally warned us about this very moment, foreign interference in our election. And we have a so brazen president that he's willing to stand in front of the White House and call for the Chinese to interfere in our elections. I'm sorry, I don't care right now about the politics of this. I'm a United States Senator. History has its eyes on us, as the song goes. And I'm going to do what's right in this moment. And what's right is to investigate this president, to hold him accountable. He is not above the law, and bring out the truth, because the public deserves the truth.
Beyond investigation, would you vote should it come to you from the House? How would you vote knowing what you know now? We'll clean that up.
Thank you very much. I'm just kicking things over here. Look, I have... I've got that hypothetical. So first of all, understand I'm a member of a jury, and I don't even know what the articles are. There's not going to be one vote. There's a number of articles of impeachment potentially. So I want to see what the evidence is. But where I'm going to tell you right now is he has damned himself with his own words in terms of violating his oath of office. In his own words, I don't care what what is your line, is you got to ask yourself. Can a president use his office for his own good? Can he compromise national security interest? In fact, in this case, a bipartisan affirmation that we help a country that is being invaded. And so his words to me have been very plain about his violation of his oath, of his putting his own political interest ahead of this country. That to me is unacceptable, and it's an impeachable offense.
But you're not now saying that you would take the vote or the votes?
I want to be very specific. So an impeachable offense means that the House returns articles of impeachment. What will be in those articles, I don't know. What will be before me. But I'm going to tell you right now, I will wait and do my job and evaluate all of the evidence before I tell you how I'm going to vote. But as a guy sitting right now on the Judiciary Committee, on the Foreign Relations Committee, I know what my Republican colleagues think, that this is ghastly what he has done, ghastly what he's done, and to me, an offense against this nation that is grave.
One of the things President Trump has tweeted, and I'm not going to quote him directly, but it's sort of to the effect of, how can you impeach a president who's presiding over such a fantastic economy? What is your assessment of what the economy is in this country, and how do you measure that? What's important to you when you look at the economy?
Well, again, does the GDP measure well-being? Does it in any way account for the fact life expectancy is going down, deaths of despair, suicides, opioid addiction? Does the stock market measure the well-being of a single mom who's a school teacher who can't afford to live in the city in which she's teaching? So the measures that this president quotes are not the measures of a moral economy that's working for people in this state and people in mine. And so when you have a nation right now that has millions of seniors living in poverty because their Social Security checks don't go far enough, isolated Americans who are home trying to take care of a spouse with Alzheimer's or a child with special needs who is seeing their financial world unravel, where you see, as I mentioned before, someone who works a full-time job, catches extra shifts where they can, paying 40, 50% of their income in rent, and still needs to rely on public assistance. So we've got to get back to a moral economy. And right now what's going on is a violation of a lot of the ideals that this nation believes, that hard work, the people who are going to put their heart and their spirit into providing for their family should have pathways for doing so. So no, this economy is nothing to brag about. The stock market may be doing good, the wealthy may be getting wealthier, but I know that working class in this America is really hurting. 40% of Americans can't take a $400 hit. They're a couple flat tires or an illness away from financial ruin or unemployment or being evicted from their homes. We've got to get back to an economy that works for everybody. And by the way, I think these are some basic policy choices we can make to give people a lot more security and a better just general sense of well-being economically.
What is your plan for managing the fallout that is going to come from increasing technology that takes away people's jobs and threatens people's jobs? People who the economy is working for now are worried about that.
I would be worried about it too. Look, you have industries that are really in an insecure moment. If you're working, as my family came to Iowa as coal miners, there are people who've done this job for generation, and we're talking boldly about getting off of fossil fuels. We have people who are truck drivers who are staring the future coming towards them like a truck on a highway in their same lane and wondering how that's going to challenge their lives. We are a nation that must prepare for the future. And in the past, we defined the future and met it boldly. Right now, it seems like we're waiting for things to happen to us. We need a federal government that's starting to chart a course that has an inclusive economy with just transitions, whether it's just transitions from fossil fuel or watching how we're switching over to a gig economy or towards a much more technology. We've done it bad. Remember, we've lost more manufacturing jobs to the microchip than we have towards factories going elsewhere. And we haven't prepared for that. And so there's a number of things that we have to do. Number one, we have to let unions lead us into this future, and as opposed to seeing the decline of unions. We need sectoral bargaining going on, and that means fast food industries and others beginning to organize workers to give them more power, because the power shift between corporations and workers have been dramatic, and workers have suffered. Number two is we need to make sure that we reimagine education in this country. Right now, we are losing ground globally because we still are talking about K through 12 education. That's the government's responsibility. When other countries have said no, 90% of brain development, first of all, happens from the wound until the 5th year. And we're the only developed nation that doesn't have universal prenatal care, which I can show you, giving low-income women doula care is cheaper than what we're paying right now for low birth weight babies, infant mortality, maternal mortality, and other complications. We're the only developed nation that doesn't have universal preschool. That is insane. I could literally show you the balance sheet analysis that dollars invested in preschool massively expand human productivity and our economy. We don't have paid family leave. The Congo and Afghanistan have paid family leave. And so now we need to think about K through 12. Why are we, as an economy, why did we move away from VOTEC and technical training in the K through 12? In a time where we talk about foreign languages, I think learning how to code could be arguably more important than learning Japanese. Then you get to, where does education stop in a 21st century economy? It should not stop in 12th grade. We should start talking about a free community college, workers training, because you know what our competitors are doing? Ever since I was a football player, I learned, look at what the guy above you in the depth chart is doing. Study the films of the other teams and what your competitors are doing. Well, what are our greatest economic competitors doing? Well, Germany is transforming their education system for a 21st century economy. First of all, they're making college affordable. In Germany, it's between 0 and 4% of median income to go to college. Here in the United States of America, between 50 and 60% of median income. But they're shifting their economy towards, in fact, Switzerland's probably the best, towards apprenticeship training that is connected to industry and jobs. I remember when I was a mayor, I wanted to help my manufacturers. So I called a manufacturing summit and asked them what their pain points were. And I was surprised. I thought their first pain point would be taxes, property taxes. Wasn't even in the top of the list. The first thing they said to me is, we can't find workers. We can't find machinists. I asked them what a starting machinist was. This is New Jersey, our salaries are kind of high. And they said the starting machinist, I think, was like $70,000. I'm like, I'm going to stop being a mayor and be a machinist. There are jobs, thousands, millions of jobs out there that we're not filling because we are not attuning our education system to the jobs of the 21st century. And so we need leadership from the federal level that's talking about changing the model. It is not K through 12. It is womb to career education that we need to start doing. And we need to start also, the last thing I'll say is, start working on just transitions now. What from coal miners, frankly, to jobs that we know are going to start shifting away. We need to start talking about how to prepare our workforce not to leave. And this is one of the best things I love about some of our other countries, and the last point I'll make here, but it's really important. First of all, what is work? I mean, it is identity, it is dignity. I've seen what happens to communities when work disappears. I live in one of those communities. And so we need to start reimagining work in this country as that, as dignity, and affirming a lot of the different ways work manifests itself. That's why my RISE credit and my long-term care work says that, hey, if you're home taking care of a special needs child, you are providing society a benefit that there should be a reward. They should qualify for the earned income tax credit if you're home taking care of someone with special needs, because it's far more expensive for that person to be out and have to rely on society for, whether it's a nursing home or something else. It's more expensive. But let's continue with that. What is work? In Switzerland, if you leave your factory job, somehow it disappears. You don't go to a minimum wage job struggling to make it working in a fast food restaurant. They shift you right into a mid-work mid-career transfer. You go into an apprenticeship training program where your income stays the same and you move on to the next job. What we say to you, yeah, it's fearful. I would be fearful if I knew that if I lose this job, that my whole family's income, our lives are going to change. So we have to start reimagining work and understand that it's identity, it's dignity, it's what actually helped my family in this city. My grandfather was working as a janitor. My great-grandfather was working as a janitor, but that he could raise a family on that salary. We need to get back to that kind of affirmation of human dignity that comes from work, as opposed to dignity stripping things that we're doing right now.
But you talked earlier about the high cost of housing.
Yes.
You rolled out a housing plan that involves tax credits for those who are having to pay more than 30% of their income.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about that? How does that help a low-income family sort of up front?
Yeah, well, it's a fully refundable tax credit. So if you're one of the many people in Iowa, and this affects hundreds of thousands of people in your states, from school teachers to home health care workers, that if you're trying to live here in Des Moines And the area median rent, we're not trying to incentivize people to buy, bigger apartments, but if you're a family that needs a 2-bedroom apartment and you're paying 50% of your income, the difference between a 30% and that 50% would be a renewable tax credit to your family that you would get up front. This will, first of all, this will cut poverty in America in the millions, and it will give people, again, what we should have in this country, which is the security of housing. It will help with gentrification in our country, which you see more and more. Low-income people being moved further and further away from cities. It will help, our whole housing plan begins to help with lowering the cost to cities of people going homeless. We literally, most people, I love balance sheet analysis. When I was mayor, I got very sophisticated in my management. I had a saying, in God we trust, but everybody else bring me data. And started running numbers on things. Like, what is more expensive to Des Moines? Is it mentally ill homeless people on the streets or in supportive housing? I'm sure you guys have covered how expensive supportive housing is. Well, Seattle ran the numbers, so did Central Florida, I think, and they saw that it was far cheaper for a city to provide supportive housing for the mentally ill, because if you leave mentally ill people on the streets, they end up in jails and prisons. Well, your state is one of the worst in America for dealing with mental illness.
Why a tax credit though? Why not just a subsidy? I mean, how do people pay up front for their rent?
Well, there's a number of things we're going to do, and look at our we really have a big anti-poverty point. Number one is we're going to have the RISE credit that's going to work a lot to help people, again, have a tax credit up front. We're going to increase the child subsidy with a big child poverty plan, really to put Americans in a more secure area. But the earned income tax credit, to me, is a great model. It's supported on both sides of the aisle. It's something that I used as a mayor to massively increase the incomes of people in my city. In fact, it was Bill Clinton that challenged me this when I went up to visit him. I was mayor-elect in 2006, and he said to me, brace yourself here, he said to me, Cory, I want to tell you that the best anti-poverty program I did as president of the United States was the earned income tax credit, but people don't collect it, Cory. And so we went back and did this. That is, thank you. There's no applause in this room. I don't understand. People watching at home are, yeah. I once did it for Chelsea. She appreciated it. But we found in Newark, and again, I cannot say this enough, and I know it might be benefiting other candidates, but God, America needs a former mayor in the White House who's actually had to run the federal programs and see what works and see what doesn't. So we found that the child tax credit, the earned income tax credit, when we set up financial empowerment centers all around our city, we could actually find for our low-income populations that we, on average, if you came into our financial empowerment center, we could increase your income by about 10% just because of people not reclaiming it. That's why I learned a lot about how to make that tax credit refundable, but also automatic. You see what the Trump administration just did to food stamps and to other things by not making sort of blanket qualifications. They're trying to take us back to the dark ages when we have simple ways that I think I can do as president to make people automatically qualify, looking at their last year's taxes, to get people their tax credits up front, and make it a lot simpler process. And again, I know there's other people in this race that just want to hand checks out to people. I can sincerely say we need to get back to making work pay, and tax credits are a powerful way to incentivize that, but make sure that everybody who works a job in America can provide for their family and give them a better life.
You introduced legislation in May to reward states for reducing their incarceration rates, which is kind of a novel approach. How would that work? And walk us through your wider plan to reduce those incarceration rates across the country.
Right. So first of all, we all know this, right? The federal government created legislation, most celebrated notoriously the 1994 crime bill, that incentivized states to build more prisons and jails and to rack up their mandatory minimums and most. So the federal government has already done this, since 1980 alone, our prison population on the federal level has gone up 800%. Overall in this country went up 500% since 1980 alone because of what the federal government was doing. And so what we just simply said, okay, we're going to reverse it. We're going to create the same incentives and sticks for just sentencing around this country. And so I have a lot of levers as the President of the United States to deal with mass incarceration, because as a guy who ran a police department, I really wanted those safer grants. I really wanted those COPS grants. I really wanted technology grants. I wanted that burn money. There's a lot of federal funding that comes to Des Moines, that came to Newark, that is really important. So I think it's about time we start using those levers to get restorative justice to be the ideals of this country. And that includes marijuana. And I know I'm not in a state that might be as far along as others, but in 2017, you want to talk about mass incarceration, there were more marijuana arrests in 2017 than all violent crime arrests combined. And people on college campuses are not the ones that are getting arrested. It is profoundly biased against low-income people, biased against veterans, biased against black and brown people. And this is one of the reasons why we have a criminal justice system that now, today, there are more African Americans under criminal supervision in this country than all the slaves in 1865. It is a brutal system of injustice that, as Brian Stevenson says, treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. And so when I ran for the United States Senate, I still remember my conversation with my pollsters. They're like, this doesn't even rank in the top 10 concerns of people in New Jersey. And I said, well, I'm not running for a popularity contest. I'm running to make us a more just nation. We may not realize that this is killing our country because, as I said, we incentivize states to build prisons. This state has allowed its infrastructure to crumble, allowed us to fall behind places like China. China built 18,000 miles of high-speed rail in recent years, and the busiest rail corridor in North America that goes from Boston to Washington, D.C., no exaggeration, runs half an hour slower than it did in the 1960s. But yet, when I was in law school, to the time I was mayor of the city of Newark, we were building a new prison and jail in this country every 10 days. Hundreds of billions of dollars for prison infrastructure, while kids in Iowa do not have universal broadband. I'm going to tear this system down as President of the United States, end mass incarceration, and make this nation safer. Literally, we know states that have been lowering their prison populations have been seeing their crime rates go down. Because if you do things to address mental illness, which is one of the reasons why our jails are crowded, if you do things to address addiction, which is one of the reasons why our jails are crowded, if you do things to address sexual assault, 86% of the women that are incarcerated in America are survivors of sexual trauma. And we do things to them in prison that compounds the trauma, and then we release people who are more danger to themselves and their communities than what restorative justice does, which empowers people. Let me give you something that people say, that this retribution ideal in our country, where they decide, let's get rid of Pell Grants for prisoners. Why are my tax dollars going to people who are incarcerated? You know what? Again, let's do a balance sheet analysis. Every dollar invested in educating a prisoner lowers the recidivism rates so dramatically that you save about $4 in taxpayer dollars when you invest in education. We have to change the way we're thinking about crime and punishment in this country. You do something wrong, you should pay a price. First of all, it shouldn't be racially biased, which is dramatically so in this country. We need to deal with implicit racial bias throughout our criminal justice system. But you should also be about restorative justice, and that's something we can do. So if I'm president, I can go through all the actions, which I won't go too far into, but everything from banning the box, the #1 employer in America is the federal government and contractors. Doing that alone, moving do you have to report your criminal conviction to the end of the hiring process will increase ex-offenders being hired, something I can't remember the exact data point, but it's about 50%. We're going to make sure that we have real programs in prison that prepare people for the transition to lower rates. We've got to deal with mental health in this issue in this country, bring it out of the shadows, start having a comprehensive system to deal with mental health care. And I could go through this a lot more chapter and verse. We've got to make sure we're dealing with addiction in this country, not incarcerating our way out of it. We've got to get just sentencing back in this country and end things like 3 strikes, you're outlaws, and all that. In fact, I challenge the entire field. I can point to 17,000 prisoners in the federal system right now who are unjustly incarcerated. Easy. We lowered, 87 senators said sentencing was too long, but we didn't make it retroactive. So imagine being in on one of those older sentences and see people coming in and out of prison now because of the new law. So I have a clemency plan that I'm not waiting for Kanye West or Kim Kardashian to come to my office. I'm going to have a clemency program that works. And so there's a lot of things that I'll do. And by the way, I'm going to do them with Republicans, because I've sat down with everybody from the Koch brothers team to Newt Gingrich on things we all agree on that Mitch McConnell won't put on the floor, but things that most of Americans agree have to do with our faith values, our libertarian values, whichever political philosophy you have, fiscal conservative values. We are doing crime and punishment dramatically wrong. It is having a profoundly racial bias. Villanova University says we'd have about 20% less poverty in America if we were able to get this system right.
Let's talk about judges as long as we're talking about justice here. What would be your most important criteria for nominating federal judges? Would you have a litmus test, for example, on abortion rights?
So, yes, I think there is a massive assault going on right now on individual freedoms in general. And so let's just say that that would be a fundamental pillar. We're seeing our judicial system shift far to the right, whereas the elevation of corporate power over individual power. Heck, we have a Supreme Court now that's gone so far that they say corporations are people. And now, because of that, the campaign finance rules are seeing hundreds of billions of dollars dumping into our politics, silencing the voices of individual Americans. Individual rights are being eroded in civil rights, in voting rights, in the ability to control your own body, in your speech rights, in unionizing rights. And so we've got to get back to balancing individual rights against corporate rights. And if there's any theme that I'm looking about, antitrust law, it really has to deal with that fundamental ideal about this still being a country where people control their own body, people who you choose to associate with. A lot of the things that gains we've made in my parents' generation are being eroded right now, and that's got to stop.
You've said, though, that you don't want to reform the Supreme Court by just adding seats,
Yes.
that you didn't want a race to the bottom. I mean, how do you start imposing a litmus test or other balancing acts and avoid making the Supreme Court even more ideological than it is now?
Well, so first of all, I will just not tell you that I may or may not have a shrine to Ruth Bader Ginsburg's health in my that she might not be a part of my prayers every single day for her health and well-being. God bless you, Ruth. Keep working out. Look, we are in trouble, and in my private conversations with Republicans on the Judiciary Committee, they worry about the traditions that made the judiciary a place where moderate voices aspire to. If you were a Yale law student, I saw my classmates who were gunning for federal judicial appointments, you didn't go to a margin and try to show how extreme you are, because you knew that this was going to be a vote that's got to get 60 votes in the Senate, which is a natural moderating force. Mm-hmm. Well, we now see what I saw, frankly, Chairman Grassley do, throw out the kind of guardrails that prevented that from happening. Now you see people literally trying out. I mean, you saw what Kavanaugh was doing, changing his writing to try out for the Supreme Court by showing how extreme he could be, to even get on the right-wing groups like the Heritage Foundation, which were clearing justices for the President of the United States. He surrendered his appointment power to right-wing extremist groups that then made every judge that had federal aspirations try to go to the margins as far as they could to try out for them. So what we've created right now reminds me of how we draw congressional seats. There's a great book by a Republican, I think his name's John Avalon. He wrote a book called Wingnuts. And he talks about how that by creating district lines that are brighter blue, brighter red, you have people trying to run to the extremes in primary, and you end up with people that are not consensus builders. Well, this has bled into the judiciary now, where you have Donald Trump and Chuck Grassley creating a system now where the ideologues are on the right are trying to now have clean pathways. And watching in the Judiciary Committee, it's sometimes funny, and I mean this. It would be funny, actually, if it wasn't tragic, because you have people that look like Doogie Howser coming before the Judiciary Committee who are really young and have never tried a case before. literally coming before us have never filed a brief in federal court. And some of my colleagues on the other side, I just look at them sometimes because they can't sit still at times with seeing who's coming before us because they're trying to pack the judiciary with right-wing ideologues. Enough of this.
How do you change it though with, again, just having a balance that's equally ideological but just on the other side?
So I have some ideas which I will not foreshadow now, definitely not, because a lot of this I think is going to be important negotiations. But I'm telling you right now, there are certain things, that are not just litmus tests for me, but things that I draw lines on. And so we see right now in your state and other states, Planned Parenthood's shutting down. We have a state in Alabama where now they've decided that a woman who is raped by her uncle, that the doctor who performs an abortion on her will face more criminal penalties than the rapist. And so I'm going to be elevating in the White House an Office of Reproductive Freedom, because I think we are in a national crisis. And for people who are listening to me right now, who have firm beliefs that are different than mine on issues like abortion, then you should join with me, because the state that has the best record for reducing unwanted pregnancies and abortions, Colorado, which saw them go down over 40%, they didn't do them the Alabama way, where you strip women of the ability to have agency over their own bodies. They actually lowered the rates of unwanted pregnancies by giving women more power. And in this case, low-income women free access to birth control. We have to find, as a guy, again, who sees the challenges of low-income women, because this is not an attack on all women, it's an attack on vulnerable women. And to see where we're going, the rights that we're rolling back, and some states, I mean, it's insanity that say that, well, you can have an abortion if you're a survivor of rape or incest. Well, what are you going to do? Create a legal process for someone to come forward to have to go through all of that in order to qualify to have a medical procedure? And so we are so far in the wrong direction when it comes to affirming women's reproductive rights. To have a nation that says we honor children, but we lead, as I said before, in maternal mortality and low birth weight babies, that we can't provide universal prenatal care, but we want to strip women from having a contraceptive care. That we are at a point of absurdity. It doesn't make economic sense. It doesn't make moral sense. It's an attack on low-income women, and we've got to have leadership to stand up and start beginning to draw certain lines. And these are my lines. If I'm President of the United States, I'm going to end this nightmare.
We don't have a lot of time left, and we do have a lot of questions left. I want to let you guys jump in with
Let's
your
do kind of
priorities
a
are.
lightning round. Let's try to
Okay.
keep it in 30 seconds. Should the U.S. torture suspects or terrorists for information?
2 words, hell no.
What's the last book you read?
Books. I am a voracious reader, and I confess, though, I am now a voracious audible.com person. And the reason why I say the company is because it was the first company I convinced to move their headquarters to Newark. And so the one I most recently read, I'm going through my mind about which one I'm willing to tell you that I've read. My girlfriend and I read aloud to each other this beautiful book, A Thief it's about this book during World War II. It was a God.
In Nazi Germany?
Yes.
Book thief?
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazingly beautiful book that we read out loud to each other. So moving, and I rarely read fiction, which is actually more of a confession of a sin, because I read so many nonfiction books. But it was so beautiful, and maybe I'll take a picture of it to put on to just tell my friends, because I'm not sure it doesn't have the word book in the title. It's the City Thieves. It's just a beautiful book about.
Not the City of Thieves with the boys who have to get the eggs.
Yes, that's it. City of Thieves. Yes.
Yeah, we have to go get the eggs. I just finished that too.
Yeah, it is really
What's
beautiful.
the moment in your professional life you most regret?
There was a kid named Hassan Washington that was in the lobby of my building as I watched him grow up. I lived in these high-rise projects, and him and his friends were smoking pot, and it triggered me because I knew that, again, they weren't Stanford students. They were black boys who have no margins for making a mistake. And it was right in the ramp up when I was running for a big office, running for mayor of the city of Newark. I took them out to dinner, took them to the movies, and made commitments to them that I was going to follow through on, and helped them get with mentors. I asked them what their dreams were. They had very humble dreams, beautiful dreams, and I knew that to be an auto mechanic, I can help you with that. But I got immediately busy with a campaign, won the mayor's seat, had surrounded with security, including in the projects, didn't see the kids for a few weeks later, and the next time I saw Hassan he was in a box, being bit. He had been shot and killed. And I always think about this because when I first met him, he reminded me so much of my dad. They both were born poor to single moms who couldn't take care of him. He was being raised by his grandmother 4 floors below me. And people were there for my father. His town took care of him when his grandmother couldn't take care of him. They brought him in. He had no college, wasn't going to go. Teachers made him go to college when he couldn't afford it. A church took a collection to get him into an HBCU, historically black college. His whole story is not a testimony to he's a hard worker, but not to his individual ambitions. It was to the love of a community, a conspiracy of love. And God gave me the chance to pay it forward. And I felt like I was too busy with personal ambition. So I will never forget that we were all there for the kid's funeral, and the hurt that I felt is we were all there for his death. Another black boy in a box in America. It didn't even make the news, but we weren't there for his life. And so yesterday, I literally told my mentee, I'm in the middle of a presidential campaign, but I'll never make that mistake again.
What's one thing that Trump has done or said that you agree with?
He signed bills of mine. He signed the most recent bill he signed was to get lead pipes out of the ground. I passed a bipartisan bill to free up lots of resources to get lead pipes out of the ground, and he signed a bill that I helped write with his office to liberate thousands of people from jail. So look, there's this idea that people are evil or not. We've got to understand that there are going to be people in the Senate we're going to have to work with. And if we so vilify each other, do you know Christie, who is somebody I could write a dissertation on my disagreements with, but he was my governor when I was the mayor of the largest city. And he and I were talking about the fact that he lost 10, 15 points in New Hampshire by one commercial. You remember what it was? They ran a commercial of him hugging Barack Obama. That was his sin. That his party had so vilified another human being that in the middle of Hurricane Sandy, him hugging Barack Obama was a betrayal that he lost 10 points in the polls. And he told me knocking on doors, and somebody held a flyer that had been sent, and they said to him, "I can't vote for you, you're too close to President Barack Obama." So this is a crisis in our country.
Should there be a citizenship question on the census?
Hell no. I'm sorry, I should be more, heck no.
Or should we reform the Electoral College?
The person with the most votes should win. I really believe that. But if you asked me a priority question back then, there's a lot of things I would tick off before I would get there. But it's gotten to a little bit of absurdity that we live in a democracy where one person can get millions of more votes and not end up being president.
You've been proactive in communicating with your constituents on Twitter. That has taken another meaning with the current occupant of the Oval Office. Would you keep your Twitter account as president?
I will not only keep my Twitter account, but I will use it in unorthodox ways. This president uses his Twitter account in unorthodox ways to demean, degrade, and divide. I will use my Twitter account as President of the United States and a lot of other creative things to remind us of who we are, to unite, to affirm and revive civic grace, and to make us see each other more and love each other more. Life is about purpose, not position. It is my life purpose. The more we can deepen our bonds in humanity, the greater things we're going to accomplish in this country.
Some people say we won't get to any of these things eventually if we don't start dealing with climate change. What's your reaction to that?
I live in a...
See it as a crisis.
Yeah, and this is the thing that bothers me is because I came to this issue not because of the climate crisis 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now. I live in a vulnerable community where the climate crisis right now is causing deaths. When heat rises, if you live in a heat island, an urban heat island, the asthma rates go up. And so, we have this You all have them in Iowa. You have 24 Superfund sites, for example, in Iowa. And kids that are now born around Superfund sites, I can show you the longitudinal data, and I know correlation is not causation, but your rates of birth defects and autism go up so much higher. We have environmental urgencies right now. I brought people from Iowa in to talk about the CAFO problem in your state and how the changing of your family farm heritage, independent family farmers, to massive corporate farming and farm practices that we incentivize that are wrong, as opposed to letting farmers lead us out of a climate problem. We have these massive corporate conglomerates leading us further into one. And people who live near them, I've had Iowans come in to talk about this, who can't drink from their creeks, can't drink their groundwater anymore, who have respiratory problems because they spray that stuff on spray fields. We have an environmental urgency and a catastrophe hitting us now. And a lot of the reasons why I don't think there's more moral outrage is because we don't see the suffering of folks who are often people we like to ignore. And yeah, they are people that live in rural areas. We ignore their struggling. We ignore the struggles of low-income kids that are getting killed at rates that are absurd of. So when I say using my platforms to help us to see each other, we've got to start to connect to the struggle of others, because within climate it is the scientific manifestation of Dr. King's words, where he said to us in the letters of the Birmingham jail, we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We have to start dealing with the suffering and the pain of the few, because with climate change, if we don't deal with it right now, it's going to hit the many, it's going to hit the all.
This isn't a short answer question, but I'm going to try anyway. One of the more complicated relationships the United States has is with Israel. How do you deal with the fact that, for example, Israel does not want to see the United States re-enter the Iran nuclear agreement? How do you move forward from that? Maintain that ally while doing things that will stabilize the region?
Well, so first of all, we've got to admit that Israel is an indispensable ally to the United States in that region. But allies and friends are honest with each other. And there are things going on in Israel right now that we have to deal with. And so I still remember this moment on the stage where I looked around and I was sort of shocked. I was the only person not raising my hand when they asked, would you automatically go back in the Iran deal? And my response is, look, I've had to do big negotiations, and again, on a city level, so they're small compared to what you do have to do as a president, but I'm never gonna signal to anybody what I'm gonna do before I sit down at the negotiating table. And if I can get a better deal from Iran, they are an existential threat to that region, from the missiles that are becoming more guided in Lebanon with Hezbollah, to them sourcing, the technical term, political science term, is they're sourcing mishegas everywhere around that region. And so my urgency is to deal with that threat, and I'm going to use every lever that I can. But we should be in a negotiated settlement with them, because this country has made mistakes now for decades that we're trying to deal with major problems through increased militarism as opposed to diplomacy. And most of Americans would be horrified if they were reading what I was reading as a United States Senator. Yemen is one of the more shameful chapters of my lifetime, that the United States of America was flying our planes to refuel their bombers in the air so that they can drop American bombs on Yemenis children. Was there ever an authorization for that military intervention? And do we barely even, are we a country that allows that to happen? With one of the greatest cholera outbreaks in my lifetime, tens of thousands of children dying? So that region, we have a lot of work to do, and we've got to get back to leading with our values. And that doesn't mean just holding our allies accountable and doing right towards a two-state solution with Israel. Hell, that means the Saudis as well. I mean, from Khashoggi to Yemen, do we follow our allies blindly when they are violating the very values of this country? And our president stands up and says, well, they're buying our military equipment. I mean, that is absurd. And I know the foreign policy is so important right now because there is a contest going on the planet Earth that is so big that people I don't think they see it. And maybe the best example is a great moment of my life where I thought I was on this wonderful mission. Me and Jeff Flake leading a group to Zimbabwe. They just had, I don't want to say overthrown Mugabe, but let's just say he was taken out of office. And now you have Emerson Mnangagwa as the head of that country. We're flying in to, again, I'm really proud that we've got a bipartisan group to go in there to talk to them about holding free and fair elections. And we have some leverage, we have sanctions, and we land, and he is flying in, the new leader from China, who says to him, and the headlines in their paper, we don't care what you do, free and fair elections. We don't care. We just want your natural resources. You want to talk about the contest going on the planet Earth right now? Go talk to Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania and ask them about the hybrid war going on in Europe right now. Where the Russians, they look at us and say, they've been doing this for decades, interfering with our elections, fomenting unrest, challenging the foundations of our democracy. Which brings us full circle back to Ukraine and this president. This is the context in which we have a president of the United States. I still don't understand how we can say this with a straight face, but it's true. He has a better relationship with Putin and Duterte than he does with Merkel and Macron in the middle of a hybrid war. When I visit with our European military professionals as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, we are in a hybrid war where the very values of this country are under assault. Freedom, democracy, liberty are all in a fight right now with China and Russia actively working on the planet Earth from Europe to Africa to change. It is totalitarianism versus free democracy. And when our president has a moment to choose a side with an ally who is under assault, Crimea has been taken, the Donbass region under attack. I sat with soldiers, with Ukrainian soldiers who told me about their lost comrades, their lost fellow patriots. And this president has a moment to provide support. Those soldiers told me just how about a radio, very proudly designed in New Jersey, that every time they tried to launch a missile at the Russians, they identified their position right away, jammed their communications, and bombed them with precision. And our radios allowed them to have a level of communication that let them avoid that detection. And this president, when they're in need of those resources, on the front lines of a fight, not just for the Ukraine, but a fight between totalitarianism and dictators and freedom and democracy, this president in that moment, what does he choose to do? He doesn't choose sides in that battle, he chooses himself. He chooses his own interest. He betrays that office and puts our allies in danger. This insanity has to stop. We are a nation that has to get back into a leadership role, and we've got to lead with our values. And the best way you lead with your values is you don't talk about them. You show them who you are. And the way we deal with each other in this country, that's one of the best ways to show it. How do we treat the weak? How do we treat minorities? Do we persecute them? Do we demean them? Do we degrade them? Or do we show our values? I have a very simple statement. You cannot lead the people if you don't love the people. And this president does not lead with love. He leads with himself and his ego and what's in his best interest. And if I have my way, we will beat him, but we're not going to beat him by being like him. One of my favorite moments in this Iowa race, it was a funny moment. I'm running to a stage. I'm about to jump on the stage. Big guy sees me. I'm a big guy, former tight end for Stanford, former All-American football player. The older I get, the better I was, everybody. And he puts his arm around me and says, I want you to punch Donald Trump in the face. And I don't miss a beat. I look at him and I go, that's a felony. We are not going to beat Donald Trump by being more like Trump. The way we beat demagogues, bullies, and bigots is the way we beat Bull Connor in Birmingham. By having artists of activism that call to the higher angels of our nature, that inspire us to be the best of who we are, not the worst. When we do that, the Bull Connors, the McCarthys, all the people that try to divide this country and inject fear, they are relegated to the wastebaskets of history as we together as this nation rise to higher ground.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That
Thank you very
is-
much.
That is our time. Thanks to everybody who is watching. Please check out DesMoinesRegister.com for more interviews with presidential candidates and all the best coverage of the 2020 campaign.
Thank you, everybody.